Our speaker is Tommy. Now, there's a million different ways to say his last name, and I thought I knew it, and then I decided I did not. How do you say your last name?
I gave up on that a long time ago. I say Chiodo, but the correct way, you got to use your hands. Chiodo.
All right. I can do that, Luigi. All right. He's a career coach, a former career coach with lots of our best outplacement companies. He is a past speaker of Launchpad Job Club, but I've been trying to get him to come back and speak to us for years, literally for years. And he wandered in, didn't realize where he was last 2 or 3 weeks ago. Not that he has blackouts, but he was in, we had a speaker, Chris Connor, is that his name? Chris McCarthy was our speaker a few weeks ago. Apologize for that. And he now is affiliated with him and other people as well. And I was like, Tommy, you're here. And I said, please come speak to us. So we are so fortunate to have him. He is also now a counselor, a professional counselor, and he's going to talk about the power of motivation. Tommy, Chiodo.
I graduated from grad school in basically in a program for career counseling at UT some 20 years plus ago. And in that program I was trained in how to help people through assessment work to figure out what is a good fit for them in the world of work. And then apply that new information towards a more focused job search and effectively out there selling themselves in a more focused manner. Focus is a real important part by the way, about job search. The more targeted you are, the more effective you're going to be, not only in finding the place that you're going to want to work, but in approaching and selling yourself into that particular environment. And so I think is taking a kind of a scattergun approach to your job search is not the way to do it. So really work on getting as clear as you can a picture of exactly what you want to do. And that's what I was all about. I wanted to help people to do that. That comes out of my own background. I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story in a little while. But I pretty quickly after graduation went to work for a prominent outplacement organization here in Austin. It was the biggest at the time here in Austin. It was called DBM. It's now Lee Heck Harrison. Has anybody been through outplacement? Okay, all right. So it's still alive and going here for some folks. Normally when I see somebody say yes that they have, I say I'm really sorry, because that means that you've been through what we euphemistically call transition time. Well, I real quickly moved in the role of managing consultant or vice president at DBM Austin, where I was managing programs for other consultants working with our clients as they were going through it. And this was in the boom days for the outplacement industry of the dot-com bust. And had lots of folks coming through the program. Pretty standard kind of a process where they were coming in somewhat shell-shocked. We help them briefly through getting through kind of the emotional part about it. The focus is on getting them to look forward rather than looking back at what happened in the past. But very briefly on that part, and very quickly moving into doing some self-assessment work and then targeted job search activities. The assessment part of it was primarily around, quite obviously, skill sets, interests, a little bit about personality, some around the value system, the values that someone brings to the table, what's important to them in a good fit job, but all that adding up to what is a good fit out there in the workplace. And real quickly, and even actually starting in graduate school, I had this notion in me that there's something more to what makes for a good fit in the marketplace, for a good fit for someone in a particular kind of job that they're really looking for. There's something else. And whatever we're using in the way of assessment instruments and getting people to focus on what they're trying to do isn't quite hitting on it. There's something else. And so way back 20 years ago, I started looking for, well, what is it? What is this thing? And, I played around with, well, values. And I spent a lot of time in values and how values are indeed important in what you do for a living. If you can get into a working environment that is in line with your personal value system or your professional value system, and they're usually pretty similar, you're going to be probably in a much more satisfying and much more comfortable kind of a work setting, and you're going to be more happy with that. But that wasn't quite it. So I got off a little bit deeper into the spiritual arena of it. And I'm not speaking specifically religious, although I do have a religious background. But it's around this kind of piece of who we are that is almost beyond description about words. But it's got this thing about us that is just fundamental to who we are. I call it our spiritual dimension. I believe everybody has that. And again, I'm not speaking religiously. I'm just speaking spiritually. And I delved around in that stuff and trying to figure out how that plays into this thing. And I was getting close, but I really wasn't quite hitting the mark. It just wasn't quite there. Well, the other part of this is that even though I was getting as close as I was, the pieces I was really starting to play around with, the values part in particular and the spiritual piece, they were working in some ways, but they weren't really quite translating very well into the practical realm of what's a good job for individuals. How does that translate into what kind of work I really want to do out there in the world? Some of it translates in some ways, but it's just, there's not a practical way. Well, I came across a little book that I'll talk a little bit more about later towards the end in my presentation, that gave me voice to where my instincts were about this other thing, this other element that's out there in terms of what makes for a really, really, truly good fit out there in the workplace. And it got me searching in a new direction. And just recently, I came across another book. And I'm going to introduce both books to you today. But this book that I want to kind of hold up there in front of you, and I'll give you the name of it on the screen here in just a moment. This one is basically became the template for my instinctive communications into the practical application of how this other element that Daniel Pink is the author of this book. It's called Drive: The Surprising Truth About What Motivates You. So it's a red and white book. It's fairly recently been published, I think 2013, 2012, something like that. Hadn't been out for very long. He's a successful writer. He wrote a book called A Whole New Mind, so that might be somewhat similar to, familiar to some of you folks. But this book, and Daniel asserts through citing a lot of research, just case after case after case of research, that the world of work that we are in now and how employers motivate and incentivize and keep employees on board and what draws them in and that sort of stuff and gets them to be productive in the workplace is broken and needs to be completely replaced. And that's basically what this book is all about, is what does it need to be replaced with? And it needs to be replaced with what Daniel says, Pink says in a lot of ways, but he calls it the third drive, motivation 3.0. I'll speak more about that in a moment. But it's a new way of motivating employees and motivating people in the workforce that's really rather different than the traditional route we went. And I'll explain more about each of these things here in just a bit. But before I do, I want to throw out a little, just to kind of get things warmed up, a little pop test for you. So, briefly, I will just say that I'm going to be talking about or asking you the difference on different aspects, whether it's an incentive or a motivator. Okay? Fundamentally, an incentive is an outside or extrinsic form of force or draw for you. It's kind of a pull sort of a thing. An incentive is outside of ourselves, whereas a motivator is an internal form of driving us in a direction. Okay? So I'm just going to leave that very simple definition there, and let's try it out on a few. Oops, got to do it this way, Tommy. There we go. Okay. All right. Now this is a kind of a silly icon or example of compensation, getting a paycheck, getting a salary. Now, is that an incentive or a motivator? Let's go with incentive. Who thinks that's an incentive? Okay, most people. All right. Who thinks that's a motivator? Okay, a few people out here. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, this one is pretty clearly, at least from Daniel Pink's perspective, and I buy into it after reading his book, is indeed an incentive. And I'll explain more about that, obviously, in just a bit. All right, let's do another one. Okay, this is bonus money or benefits, the peripheral part about the compensation package, total package that we get. How many think that this is an incentive? All right. How many think it's a motivator? All right. Still got a few hands going up. All right. Okay. All right. A little bit more. A couple more hands, actually, I think, went up on this one. I'm not going to speak to this one. I'm going to let y'all figure it out as we're going down the road as I do these others. Okay. This is the best I could come up with in terms of flexibility in the workplace, autonomy, doing things in a more flexible kind of a manner. Incentive? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Boy, if I stay this long, then maybe they'll all go up. No, okay, motivator. Okay, now everybody switch to the other side. Okay, all right, okay. I think y'all are starting to get a little bit of a flavor for where I'm going with all this thing. Okay, this one is a kind of a symbolic of the structure of the workplace, organization within the workplace that has been put into place for so very much in the history of our working environments, modern working environments, is that structure and organization. I'm getting a little fuzzier maybe. Incentive? Okay, motivator. Okay. Wait, what? Okay, look, yes, ma'am.
They're all both, depending on where you are in your life.
Okay, all right, okay. That's okay. It's both, depending on where you are in your life. Paul, help me remember if I don't repeat to do that. Just put your hand up or something, and I'll do it. Anybody else got a comment about that? Yes, sir.
Well, it depends on the structure of the organization.
Depends on the structure of the organization.
What would that be as opposed to a more
Flatter? Yeah.
Okay.
If it's hierarchical versus flatter kind of an organization, that will make a difference as whether or not it's a motivator or an incentive. Yes, ma'am.
I think it has somewhat to do with our personalities.
Our personality has a play in that. Okay. All right. Interesting. Yep. I won't disagree with that at all. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to call the shot on this thing. I think the first observation is pretty close to truth. It kind of depends on where you are and how you see the world of work and whether or not this is an internal kind of a drive or an external version of a drive. Okay. Okay, this one is around goal setting and moving and stretching yourself and growing in a new and bigger direction in the capacity of your job, in the capacity of your work, and creating an environment in the workplace that does stretch you and gets you to be more productive and growing even bigger. Is that an incentive or a motivator, the structure that creates that sort of thing? Incentive. Not many, got one or two maybe kind of in the middle. Okay, how about motivator? Okay, everybody's pretty much agreed on that one. Indeed, I think you guys are catching on where we're going with this thing. All right. I want to tell you all a story, and we're going to kind of do this as a little case study, and then I'm going to come back and ask you about what were the incentives involved in this and what were the motivators involved in this particular case study. While I was the managing consultant at DBM, I had the privilege of getting to kind of pick the clients that I personally worked with as opposed to handing off to many of my consultants that were working for me. And one of these individuals, these are, again, during the dot-com bust and the high-tech industry was they were laying off in hundreds in some organizations. It was we were just getting tons of business. It was the heyday of the outplacement industry, which would not be good for you folks. Anyway, one company, it was a medium-sized company here in Austin in its presence, but had an international presence that did a lot of aerodynamic and aerospace kind of design work. Had a presence here in Austin. And they came to me with one individual. This was a young engineer. He had been with them 3 or 4 years, I would say. And it was an interesting situation. They were letting him go because basically he was just not playing inside the rules. He just didn't work in the structure that they had set up for the organization. And he didn't seem to be very driven or motivated, aspiring to move up and grow in the organization, in this company. And the reason it was a problem is because they saw he was an extremely good engineer. I mean, extremely productive. They loved his work. He came up with real clever solutions. He was an aerodynamics engineer. Real clever solutions for the problems that were presented to him. Basically, they got to where what they would do is say, hey, or whatever his name was, here's the problem we got, and we need a solution for this thing. Come up with a design that's going to address this particular problem. And let him go, and he went off and went after it. And came back with some real clever ideas and some real good solutions for it. Productive. Got lots of work done in terms of volume. So all of these things were in his favor, yet they're letting him go. Well, again, he just didn't fit, because what we did over these, particularly the last couple of years, is we would always try to get him to move up, and we'd offer him a promotion, we'd offer him more money along with that promotion to move up in a more powerful position and be able to do even more things potentially. And he would refuse us every time. He just didn't play the game with us. So, the way we go in our company, we had to let him go. All right. Has anybody ever seen that before? Ever seen something that's phenomenal? Okay, there's yeah. All right. Okay, particularly in the engineering and technologies arena, that's just kind of how it plays. It's almost like the Peter principle taken to a real bad extent. It's sad. Anyway, well, I got a chance. Obviously, I got to work with this young man, and sat down with him. And I mean, in the first meeting we had together, the story came out. It was amazing. This young man was indeed really, really smart and very engaging, and loved his work. He absolutely loved his job. He said, man, they would just give me a project and I would dive into it, and I just had so much fun, coming up with these clever solutions and doing stuff, and they didn't create a whole lot of boundaries around how I did it. They just, let me go and doing my work. And I love that kind of an environment. But, and one other thing, by the way, he says, and I love to fly. And I own an airplane, my own airplane. So he was getting paid fairly well for the current job he was in, and it was enough for him anyway. And what he would do is he would come into work somewhere between 6 and 7 every morning and work his tail off, often through lunch or whatever, and get off ideally around 3 o'clock, maybe even 2 o'clock in the afternoon, take off, and drive up to Georgetown to that private airport up there and climb into his airplane and go flying around the rest of the day. And that was his ideal world. He did that almost every day, weather permitting, and loved it. Just a perfect situation for him. And so, of course, the rest of the story from his perspective was, and they kept wanting me to promote up into a management role. And if I got into management, 2 things. I wouldn't be able to come to work early and leave early in the afternoon. I got to be there on site, during the regular hours for the people that I would be managing and working with in the team. And the other piece is that I would be kind of managing other people doing the thing that I so much love to do in a much more kind of a structured environment where I don't get to do that problem-solving stuff quite so much anymore. That's how I perceive the situation. And so he's gone. Okay. From the business, the organization's perspective, what was the reward system? Wait. Yes, ma'am. Promotion.
Promotions and raises and being stuck in a box.
Promotions, raises, and being
Stuck in a box.
okay, stuck in a box. that was a reward. Okay, all right, very good. Anybody else got something else on top of that one? What kind of rewards were involved here? Yes, sir. Power. Yeah. We're going to offer you more power in a management role. Right. Okay, got it. Okay, anybody else? Any other kind of incentives that this company was offering?
Their reward was to take him away from what he truly enjoyed.
Okay, don't get ahead of me now. Don't get ahead of me. All right, we're going to go there. All right, well, anything else? Okay, yes, ma'am. Prestige. Very good. Most companies assume that moving up the ladder is more of a prestigious sort of role that everybody wants to do. This guy wasn't interested, you know. All of these things that we were talking about, and what, from the company's perspective, were all incentives. Okay? Now, let's look at it from this young engineer's perspective. What was his reward system? Yes, sir. Okay, leaving early, going to go fly when he wanted to, which very simply put is freedom, flexibility. What's one more word? Autonomy. Yes, and that's a word that's going to come up later in my presentation. So, okay, we got that one. What else?
Well, the ability to do the engineering.
Ability to do the engineering. What? Hands-on engineering. Okay. Okay, to actually be an engineer, which he loved to do and he was trained to do. Yes. Okay. Yes. The what? The creative rewards, and that's really, I think, where you're trying to get to. But that's the word I was looking for, right? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. A sense of accomplishment. Very good. Yes, is that he felt good about himself, that he was able to solve these problems and apply his learning and his abilities towards successful solutions. Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah. Problem solver. He loved to play the role of problem solver. These are all internal kinds of motivations, things that drove this young man. And that's all he really wanted, as long as he got paid enough to have at least partial ownership in an airplane so that he could get out every day and go fly and pay for the gas and whatever costs of that doing that, and of course, his living expenses. That's all he wanted. Pretty simple life formula for him, at that point in time anyway. Maybe when life gets a little bigger and he gets a family, and that's when he might start thinking about some of these other things. But right now, his internal, intrinsic motivations were around these things that we just named. Autonomy, creativity, accomplishment in the form of getting work done that he enjoyed doing, problem solving, all those kinds of things. All right, very good. Y'all did good. All right, now let me catch up my notes. I tweaked my notes here, and I don't want to leave anything out, so. All right. I love this quote, and this was a kind of a break open for me in terms of taking this third thing that Pink calls it, Daniel Pink, that book I just showed you, what he calls the third thing in motivation, and it broke it open for me and how that actually applies to real world, this thing that I've been looking for so many years. You want to be in a job where you're motivated. There's a big difference between motivation and incentives. An incentive is, I will pay you to keep working in order to want what I want. Motivation means that you've got an engine inside of you that drives you to keep working in order to feel successful and to help the organization be successful. It causes you to keep at it through thick and thin. Clayton Christensen is a well-published researcher and faculty member at Harvard Business Management School. He's about the end of his career because, unfortunately, he's also about the end of his life. He's gotten a pretty bad cancer that's virtually terminal. And this was an article, an interview that was made of him in Money Magazine not too long ago when he's starting to see his own future. And that turned a whole bit of a different perspective on him about, well, what is career really all about? His specialty is in productivity and, what's the other word? Performance. Performance and productivity is his area of specialty in his work. And how do you maximize that? And looking at the end of his own life caused a bigger perspective on things, and it got him to start looking at, well, what really is the motivator in life as it applies to our careers? And this is what he came up with, and I think it's a great definition that differentiates between incentive and motivation. Okay, now we're back to Daniel Pink, Drive, the Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. Daniel kind of outlines in software development ease language the evolution of motivation, starting with primitive man. And very simply, I'll just say the motivation fundamentally was survival, right? You know, if you got to go out there and hunt and grow your food and work for that kind of a thing. And if you run across something threatening, you either, that's where our fight or flight mode comes into play. A lot of this is kind of hardwired into us, sort of a thing. But anyway, that's motivation 1.0. And that worked, as Daniel Pink would put it, really well for a while until it didn't. And when it didn't is when man started, and forgive me, people, women and men, when the human race started becoming socialized, and we started working together, shoulder to shoulder, and in specialized areas where we're differentiating the kind of work we do, and kind of sharing back and forth. One person does one thing and kind of barters or trades with somebody else for something else. And that went all the way through until the mid-1900s, really, in an effective way. And that was based on, or maybe I should say is based on, extrinsic motivation. What you might call the carrot and stick motivation. Another way of... Daniel Pink describes the motivation 2.0, this extrinsic motivation, as rewarding an activity will get you more of it. Punishing an activity will get you less of it. Simple definition of motivation 2.0, or extrinsic motivation or incentives. Okay. Anybody here ever experienced any form of motivation 2.0? How many we got that know something about or have been involved in motivation 2.0 in their careers? Oh, come on, folks. The whole world lives that way right now. Okay, all right, okay. You may not quite see it that way, but believe me, that's how most of the working world is structured. Now, there are some companies that are breaking out of this already. Daniel Pink cites a lot of them and what the results that they've gotten out of breaking out of this in the motivation 3.0. But most of us know very well about the carrot and stick approach to reward and punishment as a way of motivating people in the workplace, and it's breaking down. It's just not quite working. And I'm going to get into that more here in just a bit. So we got motivation 3.0. I'm going to read you a little bit out of Daniel's book regarding motivation 3.0. I got it written up there as the Tom Sawyer effect is a good way of describing 3.0. And well, I can see while I'm fumbling around here through the pages. Who knows the story of Tom Sawyer and the picket fence? Aunt, is it Bessie's picket fence? Okay. All right. Yeah, here we go. All right. Okay, so Tom faces the dreary task of whitewashing Aunt Polly's 810 square foot fence. He's not exactly thrilled with the assignment. Life to him seemed hollow and, I'm going to have to get my glasses out, and an existence but a burden, writes Mark Twain. But just when Tom was nearly lost hope, nothing less than a great, magnificent inspiration bursts upon him. When his friend, Ben, ambles by and mocks Tom for his sorrow, for...
I'll read it.
Is it really that bad? Okay, you're right. All right. Okay, I'm going to go get over my vanity here and hold on a second. You know. Yeah, I think these are 2.5. I've worked up to 2.5. That's babe in the woods, huh? Okay. All right. When his friend Ben ambles by and mocks Tom for his sorry lot, Tom acts confused. Slapping paint on a fence isn't a grim chore, he says. It's a fantastic privilege, a source of intrinsic motivation. The job is so captivating that when Ben asks to try a few brushstrokes himself, Tom refuses. He doesn't relent until Ben gives up his apple in exchange for the opportunity. Soon more boys arrive, all of whom tumble into Tom's trap and end up with whitewashing the fence several times over on his behalf. From this episode, Twain extracts a key motivational principle, namely, that work consists of whatever a body is obliged to do, and that play consists of whatever a body is not obliged to do, which is one of the key aspects or the key principles of Motivation 3.0. It's effective for its because the world of work is moving away from what Pink describes as, or actually one of the researchers in Pink's book describes as moving away from algorithmic type of tasks, which are mind-numbing, over and over repetitive, not a whole lot of change kind of work, which was pretty prevalent in the early part of the 1900s, 20th century, and earlier than that, into the new world of work that we have already moved into very much so, which is much more of a heuristic approach, or heuristic kinds of tasks, which require a certain amount of creativity and problem solving on the fly and working independently. This is all kind of heuristic sort of stuff, okay? So, let's take a little bit deeper look at Motivation 3.0 and why it is important in this new world of work that we're living in. Okay, finally I'm going to get to this handout that you guys have got. There's a couple of quotes that you've already seen up on the screen that are on this handout, but if y'all get your handout out, that I don't have in my hand. Okay, and motivation in the workplace, that side of the page. The middle, or the paragraph, second from the bottom, where it starts, the consulting firm McKinsey and Company. One of the fundamental things that I really want you to get a hold of in a very practical sense about the reality and the importance and the significance of Motivation 3.0 and recognizing that in the workplace is the fact that McKinsey reports that 70% of all new jobs, of all job growth that we are experiencing in this country right now, is heuristic kinds of jobs. Involving this creativity and internal motivation kinds of stuff. And only 30% of the job growth of the new jobs that we're experiencing in this country right now is the old traditional Motivation 2.0 or extrinsic motivation or incentive-based kinds of work that is repetitive, routine kinds of activities. So if you want to get in where the job market opportunities are, you want to play the heuristic game. You want to play Motivation 3.0. That's the first and maybe the most significant point, and most practical of all on here. But the next one down, increasing telecommunicating, remote work sites requiring self-motivation. Also, the flattening of the work environments, organizations that we're seeing more and more of in new company organizations. It's flattening down. We don't have this hierarchical structure that we've been so used to for so long now. Is all leading up to self-motivation and self-management. Managers, there's not as many of them to look over everybody else's, the people under their work. They are dependent on those people doing it on their own. And they are looking for those kinds of self-motivated individuals that don't require a whole lot of oversight. People that will drive themselves. And how do you drive those people to drive themselves? Well, Pink maintains it's not a paycheck. It's something else. It's something else. That third thing. Okay. Intrinsic motivation has several benefits to it. It increases performance and productivity. Pink cites a study done by a group of 4 economists, 2 from MIT, 1 from Carnegie Mellon, 1 from University of Chicago, that did a study in India. And the reason they went to India because they used money as an incentive just to test out this incentive-based kind of environment. And paying people in India was a lot cheaper, so they didn't have to use so much of their budget to do this thing. And they went there and they got a group of 87 individuals in India, in this city in India, and they broke them up into 3 groups, 3 equal-sized groups. And one of these groups, they gave them a set of tasks and kinds of activities and puzzles and mostly creative kinds of things that had a little bit of a challenge involved to it, and paid them 4 rupees to do these activities as best they could, and how much they can do it, how many of the problems they could solve, this set of activities and problems and whatnot to get done. And then they took another third of the group and paid them 40 rupees. So 4 rupees, by the way, is about a day's worth of wages. 40 rupees for the second group, and that's about 2 weeks' worth of wages. And asked them to do the exact same functions, the exact same activities, and see how much they could get done in a period of time. And then a third group, they paid them 400 rupees, which was about 2 months' worth of salary or pay, the typical pay for them, and asked them to do these same activities. So, of course, measured what the lowest paid group was, what their productivity was based on how well they performed in all these activities. The second group, the medium group, did about the same. No increase in productivity out of this higher paid group. Interesting. And then they looked at the third group, the 400 rupees for doing those same services. How do you think they fared? Worse. Now, there's a lot of speculation, a lot of reasons why, and deeper into this report, and I'm not going to get into it too much today, but one part that I will point out is that the first group, the lowest paid group, basically took it on as a challenge. How well can I do this thing? Yeah, I'm going to make a few bucks out of doing this. But they took it on as just something fun to do, and that there was an internal motivation that was getting them going and doing this thing. Whereas the high-paid group, they're doing it because they're getting paid for it. Who cares how much we do? We're going to get paid the same amount of money regardless if we do a lot of productivity, we get a lot of this done or not. And so they kind of went through with a more of a nonchalant kind of deal. Starting to see how this is working and where Pink's coming from? Is that y'all about? Okay, all right. Okay, another intrinsic motivation is, or aspect about intrinsic motivation is increases job engagement. Gallup research, extensive research that Gallup did in recent years, came to the conclusion that about 50% of the U.S. workforce is not engaged in their work, and about 20% is actively disengaged in their work. And you add that productivity across the country up, and it comes out to about $300 billion a year. I mean, that's the GDP of some small and medium-sized countries in this world. A lot of money is being lost in lack of productivity because it's all based on this incentivized way of paying people or motivating people. All right? Okay. The third one about intrinsic motivation promotes creativity and long-term thinking. Pretty self-explanatory. You know, it creates a more creative environment, like we've already explained in that little study I just cited for you. And there's a lot of other good sites or studies, I should say, that Pink gets into that validates actually all this stuff, but that one as well. And then the next motivation, why motivation 3.0, is renewable and self-sustaining. Now, I'm going to refer you back to that Christensen quote that I got at the top of that page on motivation in the workplace, where he differentiates between incentive and motivation. In that the motivation, intrinsic motivation, is an internal force. It comes from inside of us, and it just keeps on going. If we are being fed towards our intrinsic motivations, whatever really drives each one of us, and it's different for each of us. That's part of the complication of this whole thing. But if you are in an environment where you are living to what drives you and motivates you, you're going to be more productive, right? And bottom line, that will just keep on going. It renews itself. And then finally, it makes you happy, which leads to another story, mine. I spent 13 years in the high-tech industry in sales. And in March, I think it was about March 23rd, 1991, the vice president of sales for Crystal Semiconductor, a really great guy and a good company, called me into his office and he closed the door. Okay. I'd been working there for about 4 years at this point. I was the international distribution sales manager for a startup company that was moving fast towards going public or being bought out by another company, and ended up getting bought out by Cirrus Logic here in town. I think some of y'all may have heard of that company. And a lot of money involved. I had equity in this company. I was employee number 99 in the startup organization. Had a great job, really good pay, particularly for my age, in a management role, reporting directly to the vice president of sales. Everything was moving up. I was living the American dream. And I was in it. And I was miserable. Absolutely miserable. For the last 2 years of those 4 years, I felt like I was kind of pushing up against this growing bow wave in front of me, just kind of plowing my way through this work, going to work every day, doing a good job. That's not what my boss was telling me in that closed door session that we had. It wasn't about productivity. But basically, what my VP, my boss, was telling me was, Tommy, you are not happy. Things are not, you're miserable. You're not, and it's affecting the morale of the organization, much less with the damage that I've been seeing do to you over the past year and a half or 2 years now. And for your sake, and frankly for the sake of the sales organization and the company at large, you need to move on. And it was the most terrible thing at that moment that could have ever happened to me, and ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, left that company, of course. Immediately started looking for other opportunities that fit my background and skill sets and whatnot. I was a good salesperson. I knew the product line. I was, had the jargon and the savvy down around the stuff that we sold at Crystal, or manufactured at Crystal, and had interviewed with a couple of companies. One in particular was a sales rep company in the central United States area that had a position open right here in Austin, Texas, selling different product lines, including Crystal's product lines. And so I was an ideal fit for the kind of role that they were trying to hire for, the sales position I was trying to hire for. Interviewed with them more than once, and literally was sitting by the phone waiting for a phone call to confirm an offer from them. I mean, they verbally pretty much said so, and I was just kind of waiting around for that to come in. And I started thinking about this, and I really did some soul searching. And I realized that, you know, if I get into this job, it's jumping from the frying pan into the fire. What makes me think that this is going to be any better than what I was doing there? Why do I think I'm going to be more into this job than I was over at Crystal Semiconductor? What's the difference? So I reluctantly picked up the phone, and I called them up, and I said, hey guys, thank you for seriously considering me for this, but I've done some real soul searching, and I can't take this job right now. And they go, what? We're putting the paperwork together now. We've got an offer coming at you. Yeah, but I've got to do some thinking for this. For your sake and for mine, I've got to really think this through a little bit more carefully. Hung up the phone and started thinking and realizing that I am flushing 13 years of experience in high-tech sales down the toilet and starting all over again. I had a good salary, I had a family to support. Fortunately, my wife was working, but it was just a crush on me because I felt like I was just starting all over again. And I basically spiraled down, or the gates broke open, if you will, emotionally for me, from what had been building for 2 years into clinical depression. I mean, fetal position, couldn't get out of bed, miserable, couldn't stay in bed, nothing was fun, nothing was happy for me. The world was just a dark, dark place. Pain everywhere, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Got on medication, got into real intense counseling. One point my therapist suggested I go check myself into a hospital to get more serious medication taken care of, all this kind of stuff. I was in bad shape, really, really bad shape. Well, over the course of 9 months of therapy in particular and the medication kicking in for me, I was able to unpack all that emotional turmoil that had been building and building inside of me over that long period of time. That 2 years anyway. Actually been building for probably a lot longer than that. And it was all around, I realized that doing this unpacking, this emotional stuff that was roiling in me was all about the fact that I was not doing what motivates me. I was not doing what I was meant to do in this world, is how I put it. And so, one little comment that my therapist made to me after lots and hours and hours and hours of therapy, you know, she suggested, Tommy, you ever thought about doing what I do? You know, it's just, you know, this counseling work. And I go, yeah, Judy, I thought about it a lot. Actually, you know, it was really fun watching you work with me and interesting to see all this dynamic going on. But, God, that means going back to school and golly, I don't know. He says, yeah, I know, but he says, you know, it seems like it'd be a good fit for you. I mean, you really seem to be oriented towards helping people. You enjoy that. It seems like just a real strong motivator for you. I don't think she used those words, but that's basically what she was communicating. And that put the little light bulb in my head that leading me going back to graduate school and getting into what I'm doing now. I've been doing it ever since. Except for a couple of years at DBM, I'm basically making about a third or less of what I was making in my heyday in that high-tech job 20 years ago. But I don't regret a day of it because it's not about the money for me. As long as I'm making enough money, I'm happy. Now, I'm not quite making enough money, to be honest with you. Much to my wife's chagrin, more than mine, but you know, I'm making it. I'm okay. I'm happy. I'm doing this thing, and I'm doing what I love, and that is the big payday for me. Now, I don't expect that to be true for all of y'all, and you know, you go off and find your dream job, and that doesn't pay anything, and just do volunteer work the rest of your life. I know that that's not the real world, but if you can discover your motivators, then you can use those in your marketing of yourself and in finding what it is that you want to do out there in the world of work. So let me stop right here. Oh, I got just a few minutes, so I'm going to stop very briefly. Of these motivators, all right, sorry, let me go back to that. Are these aspects about Motivation 3.0, how does this translate in how you might focus yourself and sell yourself, more importantly, sell yourself out in the marketplace? How might this work, Motivation 3.0? If you know what drives and motivates you, how does that work for you in trying to find a job? Yes, ma'am.
Well, in the interview, you would talk about the unique self that you bring to that company.
Okay, in the interview, you can talk about what brings you to that company, what attracts you to that company, besides the paycheck. I'll add to what you just said, but right, good point. Yes, sir.
I think it would demonstrate great personal insight and also be genuine. The emotion behind that.
Okay, you generate an energy is the word I use, but the emotion behind what you're putting out there in the form of an interview, let's take. It raises the energy level of your participation and how you represent yourself to the organization. That you're not there just for a paycheck. You're there because you really, you're going to be 100% into this job, right? Kind of an attitude, because you know that this is a good fit for you around what your motivators are, if you can articulate them, and that's a tricky part. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I think one of the aspects to remember about this is that, our picture of the engineer, of the young engineer, is more or less give him an assignment, he goes off, closes the door, certain length of time later, he comes back out with a solution. It's a really cool solution. And so that's very internal. But another aspect is team. And I know that both I and my son, I've seen it in both of us, a cool problem is not all there is. It's also a team. And it doesn't have to be the manager and the team, it's just the other people that you're working with. It's a big piece of it for some people. Maybe there are some people who want to go off in their office all by themselves, take down the engineering handbook and their slide rule and
Right.
I got a solution. But
Good. Very good.
we want a team. We want to, we are going to do this.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. Basically, he went back to the young engineer, and that person, this guy probably went off and closed the door, and he did some work, did it on his own, and came out with a solution, and he was perfectly happy with that. And I don't know if that was true or not, or what this man was suggesting is that very much in an engineering kind of an environment, you work in a team situation. It's not a one person working on a solution for a problem. You get a team together, and that can be very motivating if indeed team environment is a motivator for you. And if you can articulate that in an energized fashion in an interview, all the more. Particularly if the company is a team orientation in how they approach things. They see, this individual really is motivated and jazzed by the kind of environment that we try to set up for this company. Yes, ma'am. How do you determine if it's the right team? That's a great question. And one of the things that I push real hard when I'm in interview training mode with individuals or groups is that an interview should be almost a 50-50 proposition between who's interviewing who. The individual, the candidate, should be interviewing the organization as much as the organization is interviewing the candidate, and you are diving into those things that really do confirm whether or not this is a good fit for you, even to a kind of a dicey level, But I believe if it's a company that may pay well and give you a job, but is not a good fit for you, how good is that a really good deal for you anyway? So you need to be on discovery mode as much as the interviewer is, but I digress. One other place, and because I got to get going on here, about how do you use your motivators, your drivers in the marketplace and getting yourself a job and focusing on a job is not only in the interview, but also in that very, very important tool that all of you, I'm sure, are using on a regular basis that Kathy promotes all the time. What? Networking, exactly. If you can go into an information interview, is what I call them, because a networking meeting, it should be only about you gathering information from individuals and giving them a little bit of a taste of who you are without ever going into asking them to help you to get a job. That's another whole lecture. I won't get into that. But basically, a good networking meeting is an information interview where you're going in there and you're engaging in conversation with these people and you're gathering information, perspective from this person that you're meeting. And one of the things you're trying to convey in that meeting, frankly, or ask about, is what around your motivators and drivers. That, I am looking for organizations that are very team-oriented. I work best and function best and love working in team environments. You might even tell a story. Stories are very powerful selling instruments and very powerful and very compelling ways of describing yourself, particularly around these soft things called motivations. And you tell a story about where you worked effectively in a team environment. And you say, what kind of organizations do you know that do the kind of things that I know how to do, that have a very team approach to how they do things? And that might spark something in that person's mind, and they're going to suggest a company name or two. You go off an information interview with somebody within that organization. Okay, enough preaching on that one. And I've got to move on. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to get into this, partially because of time, but also because I'm borrowing very generously from Daniel Pink's book, and I realize that. Probably even crossed the line of copyright, frankly. But I want to just give you a little enticer. These are a real basic outline of what Daniel Pink asserts are the fundamental aspects of Motivation 3.0, where they come from, how they're translated in the real world. He lists autonomy, and autonomy is not just about time or location. It's also about what kind of tasks that we do, techniques that we use in our work, and team environment. So you hit on one of them right there. Mastery is one of the big three, and mastery is about flow. Let's see if I can do this very briefly. Flow is being in a working environment where you are in what he calls the Goldilocks mode, where the work that you're doing is not too so fundamental and simple that your mind goes into neutral, but not so overly challenging that you're just boggled by it and it just puts you into overwhelm mode. Somewhere in between where you're being stretched, you're challenged and growing. You get in that mode where, man, you really get into it and you lose track of time and you get lost in the work. That's flow. And he describes flow in some of the studies around flow in some detail in the book. So go get the book if you want to learn more about what that's all about. And then, of course, purpose. More and more, as y'all have been reading, I'm sure, about, particularly with the younger generations, a job is no longer about just getting a paycheck. It's about doing something that's giving back to the world, that's making a difference, that's meaningful in some form or fashion. Now, meaningful doesn't mean necessarily giving back to the world in some altruistic sort of a way. It may be meaningful for me personally about something that's important to me, but the job has an element of that involved in what the work is all about, so that it becomes a meaningful activity for me. It's doing something that benefits something that's important to me other than myself, right? And that's what purpose is all about. Okay. By the way, also, just to incentivize you, Pink, in the back of the book, he's got some really great exercises and other stuff that talks about how do you discover some of these, for yourself, which of these kinds of drives and motivators are really important to you and fit you well. So, fundamental question is, if you read the blurb about me coming in today, the last thing that I told Kathy to say about me is to ask the question or address the question, what are your motivators? What drives you? Okay, I addressed it. Thank you very much. It's been fun. No. Okay. This is a toughie. It's for most of us, I have found in the 20 years that I've been toying around with this subject, it's not an easy question to answer for most of us. It kind of seems that way on the surface, but when you start diving down into where your motivators and drivers really are and being able to articulate those, it just doesn't translate into words real well. It feels right, but God, how do I describe it? What is it? Yes, ma'am. Yes, it does not translate easily into a job title. Good point. Yes, ma'am. You are right. Good point. The emphasis here is on the word intrinsic. The answers to the question cannot be easily found through traditional self-assessment instruments, as I've shared earlier. It's not a linear analytical process. About 6 years ago, I came across another book. Actually before the Daniel Pink's book, a little book that unlocked the door to that missing something that I started looking for 20 years ago. The book is called Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation by a fellow named Parker Palmer. Dr. Palmer is an educator and is taught at the college level, but has since gotten out of the world of education and has gotten off into starting his own nonprofit organization around helping people to discover themselves. It's called Courage and Renewal is a company, the organization he founded, the nonprofit he founded. And he started a movement around putting together ways or processes or approaches to self-discovery that is kind of unusual in some ways. It's not exotic, but it comes from the Quaker tradition, and he's a Quaker. So he's got a little bit of what I call God language in how he approaches things. And this book is basically his story about how he discovered his true self, as he puts it, and how that comes about and the conviction that he brings to the table around that quote. And it's important to me, so I apologize. I'm going to take 1 or 2 more minutes here. And go to the flip side of that handout I gave you, where the top of it says Vocation, Birthright Gifts, and True Self. I want to read just a couple of pieces out of this thing, even though you got it, just to bring some emphasis to what this is all about. The idea that vocation or calling comes from a voice external to ourselves, a voice of moral demand that asks us to become something that we are not yet, someone different, someone better, someone just beyond our reach, is a distortion. Today I understand vocation quite differently, not as a goal to be achieved, but as a gift to be received. Vocation does not come from a voice out there calling me to become something I am not. It comes from a voice in here, calling me to be the person I was born to be, to fulfill the original selfhood given to me at birth by God. Now, down to the very last paragraph, not the last section, the last paragraph. Our deepest calling is to grow into our own authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. As we do, we will not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service to the world. True vocation joins self and service, as Frederick Buechner asserts when he defines vocation as the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. Probably my favorite quote and favorite definition of vocation, even to the point where I put it on a slide. And I'm going to end with, I love that. It just, in a nutshell, defines what I think vocation really, really is in our lives. It's not a paycheck, folks. It's about doing something that is meaningful to us. And that's my work. I'm just going to put in a very brief commercial. I am focused on helping people to discover who they truly are within themselves, how that translates into living out themselves in their true sense, finding their deep gladness, that place where their deep gladness meets the world's needs, And in a very practical sense, that translates to what motivates and drives you in the world. If you're interested in that, I invite you to send me an email, even give me a call. We'll set up a time to meet. First time I meet with somebody is free, and we can talk about it. I also am associated with another organization that Kathy mentioned called Beacon Career Services. They do a little bit more of a kind of traditional more way of doing it, but what got me into doing that, and the reason I got out of the outplacement industry in the first place, is that the outplacement industry got away from really kind of helping the individual with discovering what they really want to do with their lives. It was all about, what are your skill sets, what are your experience, let's go find you a job. And that's, in an expedited fashion, that's probably what it should be, but I want to go deeper than that. And Beacon gives an environment where there's a lot of what I call hand-holding involved. And the extra instrument that Chris McCarthy used or talked about a few weeks ago, is a good instrument to kind of play into, well, where are vulnerabilities, our stressors, and how do we work around those in this transition process. So that's another good environment to use if you're trying to get some focus, but you don't really look at, well, what your purpose is in life and meaning necessarily. Focus on that piece. If you really look at that piece, and I know that's not for everybody, but if those of you who may, get in contact with me and we'll talk some more. All right. Y'all have a great day. Thank you very much.